Hey there, welcome to Sleepy History Secrets, the place where history gets stranger the longer you stare at it, and somehow you can still fall asleep through the confusion. Tonight we're exploring the medieval idea of beauty, that delicate art of looking pure, holy, and just a little bit undead. In this quiet journey, you'll find out why people in the Middle Ages powdered themselves with poison, why foreheads were worshipped like cathedrals, and how smelling vaguely of roses could save your reputation. Before you settle in, take a small moment to like the video or subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy falling asleep to humanity's most creative mistakes. And while you're here, let us know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's oddly comforting to imagine people across the world, each lying awake at entirely different hours, all united by the same thought. Why did anyone think bleaching their face with lead was a good idea? Now, dim the lights. Maybe let a fan hum softly in the background. Let your mind loosen like an unlaced corset. And together, let's drift quietly back to a world where beauty came with instructions, danger, and a very faint smell of vinegar. You open your eyes to a century where sunlight is suspicious, where tan skin means field work, and field work means poverty, and poverty, of course, is ugly. The most admired faces are not healthy or glowing. They're pale, translucent. The goal is to resemble porcelain that just heard bad news. To be beautiful in medieval Europe is to be nearly colourless. The paler you are, the higher your rank, and the less likely you are to own a shovel. Fair skin means you can afford to stay indoors, behind curtains, beneath layers of linen. It means you're not out sweating in the sun, being productive, which would be dreadful. Of course, nature isn't always cooperative. Some people are born with circulation, others tragically have pigment. So, humanity did what it always does, invented chemistry before understanding it. To achieve that delicate aristocratic anemia, you start with vinegar, metal, and patience. You soak thin sheets of lead until they corrode, turning into a soft white crust. You grind it to powder, mix it with oil, and smooth it across your face. It hides freckles, creates a perfect matte finish, and slowly shuts down your nervous system. But at least you'll look divine. Some people prefer natural methods. If your definition of natural includes vinegar-soaked cloths, crushed pearls, and egg whites beaten to the consistency of despair. You dab it on gently, wait for it to dry, and then admire how it tightens your skin until you resemble a very elegant omelette. If you're feeling bold, you might even enhance the illusion by painting delicate blue veins on your neck or arms. Because nothing says nobility like pretending your blood is about to stage a jailbreak. Romantic poets compare women to milk, to snow, to the moon in winter, which is a poetic way of saying she looked like she might faint at any moment. And fainting was fashionable. It proved fragility, and fragility was expensive. The beauty ideal of the time wasn't strength or energy. It was being almost too delicate to live. A complexion so pale it seemed spiritual, as if God had personally filtered you through a linen sheet. Men weren't immune to this quiet madness either. Courtiers in later centuries began adopting mild powders of their own, a light dusting to even the complexion. Because looking flawless wasn't just a feminine art, it was a sign of refinement. A polished man was less likely to smell like a stable, and more likely to be invited to poetry readings. There were, of course, consequences. Lead poisoning didn't care about class. Pale aristocrats often suffered headaches, muscle weakness, and hair loss. Their skin cracked and flaked, their teeth darkened. The more beautiful you looked, the faster you fell apart, which in a way was poetic consistency, but the fashion endured. To be pale was to be pure. It meant your body was untouched by the world, your face unkissed by sunlight, your soul unsullied by work. You weren't just avoiding tan lines, you were performing moral superiority, and everyone understood the message. A peasant's tan said, "I labour," A merchant's flush said, "I negotiate." But a noblewoman's pallor whispered, "I simply exist." You might think this obsession faded with time, but even today, echoes remain. In makeup aisles labelled porcelain and ivory, in photos where people still chase the same impossible smoothness. Humanity, it seems, has always confused fragility with elegance. If you lived in the 14th century and wanted to maintain your glow, you'd also avoid certain foods. Spices were risky. They made the blood too warm. Wine, however, was perfectly fine. It made the cheeks gently pink, which the church tolerated as long as you looked repentant while drinking it. And so, in flickering candlelight, across stone chambers that smelled of vinegar and roses, beauty became an act of devotion. Half prayer, half poison. Every dab of powder was a confession. Every flake of lead a promise. To be pale wasn't just to look noble, it was to look forgiven. As we drift further into the story, you'll see how this strange theatre of appearance grew taller, literally, until the forehead became a cathedral of fashion. But for now, rest your thoughts on this image. A noble woman seated before her mirror, her skin white as paper, her hand trembling slightly as she paints a vein the colour of sky. She believes truly she's becoming closer to heaven. And perhaps, in a slow, toxic way, she is. If you follow the thread a little further, you'll discover that medieval beauty was an upward journey, not of the soul, but of the forehead. After achieving a face pale enough to frighten the moon, you were expected to extend it, upward. The higher your forehead, the higher your intellect, your status, and your chance of being compared favourably to an angel. The forehead was not just part of the face, it was a canvas for salvation. A tall, smooth, uninterrupted expanse of skin was said to show purity of thought and nobility of mind. In portraits, these foreheads shine like miniature suns, stretching almost to the crown of the head, reflecting candlelight in serene resignation. The more space between your eyebrows and your hairline, the more space, apparently, for wisdom. But nature once again needed correction. Not everyone was blessed with the intelligent dome, so people began what can only be described as a personal construction project. First came the tweezers, small, cruel devices of ambition. Women plucked not only their eyebrows, but entire inches of hair from the top of their heads. The goal was a perfect half-oval of skin. The pain was irrelevant. Beauty, after all, was already a form of penance. For those who found plucking too slow, there were recipes. Depilatory creams made from lime, vinegar, and sometimes powdered walnut shells. In particularly creative circles, cat dung was said to help soften the hairline. No one knows who started that rumour, but it's safe to assume they laughed. The mixture was spread across the scalp, left to tingle, or burn, then wiped away, taking the offending hair with it. Medieval beauty was an endurance sport dressed as grace. Once the forehead was suitably vast, eyebrows became a problem. Eyebrows were considered unruly, emotional things. They moved too much, suggested opinion, and disrupted the calm mask of virtue, so they were eliminated, tweezed, shaved, or dissolved depending on patience and budget. A smooth brow meant you were disciplined, serene, and most importantly quiet. Art from the period shows women with tranquil faces, empty of expression, eyes gazing slightly downward as if perpetually meditating on higher truths, or possibly regretting the lime burns. To modernise, these women look strangely otherworldly, almost like marble statues pretending to breathe. That was the point. Beauty was meant to resemble heaven, not humanity. But the medieval world wasn't entirely cruel. Not everyone could afford to expand their face. So, as always, imitation stepped in. For those less willing to pluck, a simple trick existed. Draw your new hairline higher with pale powder, cover the rest with a veil or band, and pretend your forehead reached the next time zone. Medieval contouring, you might say, with fabric instead of foundation. Fashion supported this vertical obsession. Wimples, hoods, and hennins, those famous cone-shaped hats that made women look like mobile church spires, all emphasised the upward stretch. The hennin in particular was a marvel of impractical beauty. A wire-framed cone, sometimes 2 feet high, wrapped in silk and topped with a sheer veil. To fit your head into one, your hair had to be braided tightly or shaved completely around the crown. Comfort was not part of the aesthetic vocabulary. As you might imagine, entering a room in such a hat required skill. Doorways were a hazard. Candles were worse. But each inch of height was an inch of honour. The taller the hennin, the closer you were to heaven, or at least to the ceiling beams. It was fashion as architecture, a wearable cathedral designed to remind everyone that holiness and headroom were closely related. This architectural beauty extended beyond the forehead. Skin was polished smooth with egg whites or rosewater until it shone faintly like parchment. Some even used mixtures of chalk and honey, which provided both glow and stickiness, a small price to pay for radiance. Under candlelight, the effect was ethereal. These faces didn't belong to the earth. They floated, pale and luminous, in the smoky air of banquet halls and chapels. It wasn't all women either. Men too engaged in quiet adjustments. Courtiers trimmed and shaped their hair into modest waves that framed the forehead, leaving space to suggest contemplation. A well-groomed man was a safe man. He was less likely to be mistaken for a farmer, and more likely to be invited to play the lute. Grooming, in its own way, became a language of self-control. This pursuit of the perfect head created an odd contradiction. The church preached humility while praising beauty that required extreme vanity to achieve. Pain became devotion. Fashion became theology. The forehead, once a simple surface for expression, turned into moral real estate. Every plucked hair was a declaration of faith in order and restraint. If you could visit a medieval court, you'd find an entire gallery of high-domed faces nodding gently under veils and hennins, their necks aching, their brows gleaming with composure. You'd smell wax, wine, and a hint of scorched lime, and you'd realise that the architecture of beauty wasn't built with stone or marble, it was built on skin. As the story drifts onward, the light begins to warm slightly, shifting from ivory to faint rose. Because even the most disciplined face eventually needs colour, just enough to look alive, not enough to seem human. In this next quiet turn, we'll explore how a single drop of blush could balance 1,000 sermons, and how the line between purity and vanity was drawn in shades of red. If we follow the thread a little further, colour begins to creep back into the story. After all that careful whitening and plucking, the medieval face needed some sign of life. Pale was pure, yes, but entirely bloodless suggested the wrong kind of afterlife. A touch of blush, delicately placed, could suggest you were holy yet human, but too much, and you looked like a sinner trying to bargain with rouge. In this era, beauty lived, in the space between devotion and danger. The church warned constantly against vanity. Sermons reminded women that painted faces deceived both men and God, as though the Almighty might mistake foundation for sin. But appearance mattered too much to be abandoned entirely. A little rose tint could soften the divine glare. A little warmth on the cheek could whisper, "I'm still mortal, but trying my best." The recipes for that whisper were impressive in their creativity and mild recklessness. For common women, beet juice and crushed berries were the go-to ingredients, simple, cheap, and washable. Rubbed lightly into the cheeks, they gave a soft bloom that lasted until the next confession. The scent was faintly sweet, like summer trying to survive in candlelight. For the wealthy, cosmetics turned into alchemy. Some mixed wine lees, those purple sediments left at the bottom of a barrel, into paste. Others used powdered cochineal, a vivid red made from crushed insects imported from warmer lands. And the truly ambitious preferred cinnabar, a mineral form of mercury ground into fine powder, known for its radiant red glow and its ability to slowly destroy the nervous system. You could tell someone's social rank by how lethal their makeup was. The poorer you were, the more likely your blush came from berries. The richer you were, the more likely your face was quietly dissolving into poetry. Still, danger never stopped fashion. The ideal blush was subtle, a pink echo of modesty. Women dabbed colour high on the cheeks, close to the eyes, so it looked like they'd just experienced a small revelation. The goal was to appear touched by grace, not intoxicated by it. Painters and poets adored this look. A proper lady's face, they wrote, should resemble dawn breaking over snow, faint, gentle, and doomed to fade by noon. That metaphor did little for public health, but a lot for artistic careers. Yet even as the colour spread across noble faces, guilt spread with it. The church, never fond of chemistry, accused cosmetics of summoning vanity, deceit, and even witchcraft. To look too beautiful was to invite suspicion. To appear without effort was safest, but of course, appearing effortless took endless work. In confessionals, priests scolded women for rouge, then secretly complimented them outside. The contradiction became part of daily life. Beauty was tolerated if it looked unintentional, and condemned if it looked deliberate. A delicate balance, like walking on a moral tightrope while holding a jar of beet juice. There are stories of women caught mid-preparation when the parish bell rang. They'd hurriedly wipe off their rouge before Mass, leaving faint pink streaks like battlefield scars. One can imagine them kneeling afterward, praying not only for their souls but for their complexions. Men too were not entirely innocent. Courtiers sometimes pinched their cheeks before entering halls, a quick, blood-safe method to appear lively without resorting to powders. The gesture was fleeting, but it shows a truth that never quite fades. Even in prayerful centuries, everyone wanted to look a little better than God made them. The materials themselves carried a strange poetry. Beetroot for warmth, rose petals for virtue, wine for courage, lead for power. Beauty was chemistry disguised as morality. Each colour had meaning, soft red for modesty, deep red for passion, white for piety. Together they built a quiet language spoken entirely through skin. There were even regional variations. In France, paleness remained absolute law, with just enough blush to suggest survival. In Italy, a warmer tone was acceptable. Mediterranean sun could be excused as God's own spotlight. In England, everything leaned toward restraint, subdued, powdered, almost frightened of joy. The weather probably helped. The church continued to frown, but never fully stopped the trend. Its own art celebrated colour. Saints were painted with radiant cheeks and glowing halos. Angels shimmered with impossible light. Religious painters, in a way, justified beauty by turning it into devotion. If heaven itself was luminous, perhaps a little shimmer on earth was forgivable. So women painted cautiously, praying with one hand and dabbing with the other. They whispered formulas as both recipes and prayers. Take rose petals, crush with honey, mix with grace. The line between altar and vanity table grew beautifully thin. If you had entered a chamber just before a feast, you might have seen a noblewoman seated beside her mirror, candle flickering, a servant holding a small bowl of red. She dabs her cheeks, checks her reflection, then quickly wipes a little away, enough to look alive, not enough to look ambitious. The mirror reflects her calm face, her trembling hands, and somewhere beyond her shoulder, the shadow of a priest passing down the hall. When the feast begins, the room glows with flickering light, faces pale and pink like candle flames. Laughter drifts through air heavy with wine, incense, and rose water. To the casual eye, everyone looks serene. Underneath, the quiet fear lingers. Too much beauty might mean too much pride, and pride, as every sermon reminds them, is the oldest sin. And so the blush stays measured, the smiles modest, the eyes lowered. A single drop of colour becomes a daily negotiation between desire and salvation. Medieval beauty was not about seduction, it was about balance. The art of pretending you hadn't tried while making sure everyone noticed that you had. From here, the story opens into the golden strands of hair and the veils that guarded them. How colour shifted from the cheeks to the head, how sunlight itself became both blessing and accusation. The face was now complete. The next frontier of beauty was everything that framed it. Our quiet exploration now turns to what framed the medieval face: the hair, the veils, and the strange theology of strands. You might think hair was just hair, a practical problem to be brushed and braided, but in the Middle Ages it was a spiritual hazard. It could mark purity or temptation, marriage or danger. It could save your soul or, if uncovered at the wrong time, doom it entirely. Blonde hair, for instance, was not simply admired, it was canonized. To medieval eyes, golden hair caught light like a halo. Artists painted saints and angels with soft flaxen curls, so it was only natural that the living tried to imitate heaven's colour palette. In poems, a woman's hair was the sunlight of her virtue, which sounds lovely until you realise that meant any other colour suggested something less holy. Brunettes were exotic, perhaps even dangerous. Redheads, divine warning signs. For those unlucky enough to be born without divine highlights, there were remedies. Recipes promised to turn dark locks into luminous threads of gold. One popular method required boiling saffron and chamomile flowers in water, adding a little alum, and then combing the solution through the hair before sitting for hours in the sun. You might end up with slightly lighter hair or slightly less of it. Either way, the smell was floral and faintly scorched, the scent of devotion. Some mixed honey and ashes into paste and spread it through their hair like a primitive conditioner. Others, more daring, used urine, yes, human or animal, left to ferment for weeks, believed to strip colour from the strands. It worked, but not in the way anyone hoped. Yet fashion is patient. If holiness required unpleasant odours, then holiness they would have, preferably wrapped in silk ribbons to disguise the evidence. For unmarried women, hair was a kind of advertisement. Loose and flowing signalled innocence, a life still open to vows or proposals. In tapestries, maidens' hair tumbles down their backs like streams of light. But once married, hair had to vanish. To let it remain visible was to invite scandal, as though one's vows could be undone by a strand out of place. So, married women bound their hair in nets, coifs, or linen caps. The most devout wrapped it in multiple layers, a veil, then a wimple, sometimes topped with a stiff hood that made turning one's head an architectural challenge. The weight was considerable, and in summer heat, saintliness must have felt remarkably similar to heat stroke. Each head covering carried a moral story. The wimple, that graceful frame of cloth covering chin and neck, symbolised modesty and wisdom. The coif, tied snugly under the chin, represented domestic virtue. Even the fine nets that peeked from under hoods were moral statements, beauty properly contained. For noble women, the coverings became opportunities for quiet luxury. Gold-threaded veils, jewelled pins and ribbons scented with rose oil turned modesty into art. It was possible to obey the letter of the rule while decorating its edges extravagantly. If humility needed embroidery, there was always a willing hand. Men had their own codes. The fashionable knight or courtier wore his hair to the shoulders, slightly curled, carefully perfumed. Too long, and he risked being called vain. Too short, and he risked looking common. The balance between chivalry and practicality was measured in inches. A nobleman's hair, like his sword, needed regular maintenance and just enough polish to catch the light without blinding anyone. Hair also appeared in rituals of devotion. Monks shaved their crowns in tonsure, a symbolic bald patch representing renunciation of vanity. The irony, of course, is that maintaining a perfect circle of baldness requires regular upkeep. Nuns, meanwhile, cut their hair upon entering the convent, surrendering vanity and identity alike. The first cold draft across the scalp was part of the initiation, the soul's breeze of humility. There were even saints associated with miraculous hair. Legends tell of St. Agnes, whose hair grew long enough to cover her nakedness when guards tried to shame her. St. Mary of Egypt was said to have turned her body to prayer so completely that her hair thickened like a garment. These stories made hair both dangerous and sacred, a thing to hide, admire, or wield as a miracle, depending on circumstance. In the medieval imagination, hair was alive with meaning. Loose hair could seduce, bound hair could sanctify, dyed hair could deceive. To manage one's hair was to manage one's soul. Every strand had a purpose, and sometimes a sermon. If you picture a summer feast, you'd see a shimmering hall filled with women in pale gowns and towering headdresses, their veils trembling slightly as they turned their heads. Beneath each veil lay a private story. A girl who once ran barefoot through sunlight, now sealed inside linen. Another who quietly lightened her hair to match her idol's halo. Another whose scalp still tingled from the saffron rinse of devotion. The air smells faintly of wine, wax, and something floral that once promised transformation. Hair at its heart was the most intimate form of display, always personal, always visible, even when hidden. It was the boundary between the sacred and the human, and if you managed to keep it both beautiful and properly concealed, the church might forgive your vanity just this once. Our path now carries us toward the rest of the body, not the sinful parts, but the postures, the movements, and the invisible language of manners. Because medieval beauty was never just what you looked like. It was how you stood, how you smelled, and how gracefully you managed to almost faint without falling into the fire. From here, the story drifts down from the head to the body, where beauty had less to do with features and more to do with posture, with how you carried yourself, or more precisely, how you managed not to carry anything at all. The ideal medieval body was an instrument of quiet suffering, light, controlled, and almost too fragile for use. It was a sculpture pretending to breathe, and it measured elegance in how convincingly you could look tired without dying. To move beautifully, you had to move slowly. Quickness suggested either enthusiasm or labour, both unfashionable. The noble body, like the noble soul, was to be composed. Even the smallest gesture was a sermon. Rising from a chair was to be done with the precision of a sunrise. Bowing took patience. Walking was a gentle performance of restraint. To rush was to confess that you were mortal. Clothing helped enforce this philosophy. Layers upon layers of linen, wool, and sometimes velvet pressed against the body like architectural scaffolding. The waistline was high, almost under the bust, so the torso appeared long and the legs invisible. It created the illusion of a floating figure, willowy, detached, and very slightly in danger of tipping over. Corsetry was not yet the steel trap invention of later centuries, but lacing still shaped the form. The goal wasn't compression so much as posture correction. You were to stand like a candle flame, thin and unwavering. At banquets, women practiced the art of fainting tastefully, never too early in the evening and preferably near a cushion. Men bowed low enough to prove respect, but not so low as to appear toiling. Beauty, like etiquette, was measured in inches and timing. The church approved of moderation, but moderation was an elastic word. A little discomfort suggested devotion. Too much suggested pride. And yet, to appear too comfortable was worse. It meant you weren't trying hard enough. The result was an entire society quietly suffocating under manners and fabric, smiling politely through heat and hunger. Writers of the time spoke often of the gentle countenance. It wasn't just about the face, but the whole bearing. A slow rhythm, a voice kept low, gestures smooth as sleep. To be beautiful was to look calm in chaos. That ideal carried across both genders. A knight, even in armour, was expected to move with poise. The trick was to look as if the metal didn't weigh 40 pounds, and so faintness became fashionable. If you were pale and dizzy, people called you graceful. A healthy flush suggested the wrong kind of enthusiasm. To be delicately exhausted was to be admired. It meant your life was too refined for vigour. You had transcended the need for oxygen. The poets adored this aesthetic. They wrote of maidens weak with virtue, of sighs that lasted entire stanzas. A noblewoman's cough could be mistaken for music. It was the sound of refinement, fragility polished into an art form. Some even believed that weakness itself purified the soul, as if illness was simply holiness with a fever. Men, too, practiced visible restraint. The ideal man was tall, lean, and gentle-handed. His strength was spiritual, not muscular. Knights trained for battle, yes, but were praised for elegance rather than aggression. A good fighter was one who could kill gracefully and recite poetry afterward without smudging his gloves. It was said that true nobility could be recognised by its clean fingernails, the surest sign you had never done anything useful. And then there was the matter of scent, invisible yet deeply moral. To smell pleasant was to be civilised. To smell of sweat was to confess your station. People carried pomanders, small metal spheres filled with spices, herbs, and sometimes vinegar-soaked sponges. They hung from belts or chains and were lifted discreetly to the nose in moments of social emergency. The more perfumed your accessories, the more virtuous you appeared. Cleanliness was next to godliness. But bathing, as the church reminded everyone, was suspiciously close to pleasure. So instead, people dry bathed, changing linen frequently and rubbing their bodies with scented cloths. It worked surprisingly well. Fresh linen absorbed oils, and the faint fragrance of rosemary or rosewater lingered pleasantly. A well-kept body was therefore less about soap and more about fabric management. It was a moral system built on laundry. In gatherings, the air shimmered with competing fragrances: wine, wax, lavender, and the occasional hint of smoke from someone standing too near a torch. Beauty wasn't just seen, it was inhaled. To smell like roses was a compliment. To smell like effort was not. There's a quiet irony here. The medieval world worshipped fragility but demanded endurance. To look effortless took immense effort. To appear light required heavy fabric. To seem serene required constant fear of impropriety. Grace came through exhaustion, a kind of elegant suffering performed for both heaven and the court. Imagine for a moment a feast in a grand hall. The flicker of hundreds of candles paints faces in soft gold. Women sit perfectly still, their spines aching, their hands resting lightly on the tablecloth. Men laugh politely, their movements slow and rehearsed. A lute begins to play, and a soft breeze from the door carries the smell of roses, beeswax, and cooked meat. No one dares scratch an itch. To be composed is to be respected. To be alive is secondary. In this delicate theatre, beauty and manners became one and the same. A graceful body meant a graceful soul. To break posture was to break character, and in the medieval play of life, everyone was both actor and penitent. As the candles burn lower, the hall softens into quiet hum. You can almost hear the silk breathing, the linen sighing, the faint clink of jewellery shifting as bodies try not to move. The night stretches, and so does the patience, and just before sleep claims the room, you realise the true miracle of medieval beauty wasn't surviving the toxins, it was surviving the etiquette. Our path now carries us toward the subtler senses, the whispers of scent, the weight of fragrance, and the strange rituals that made cleanliness a spiritual challenge. Because in this world, even washing could be a confession. If we drift further into this world of quiet manners, we arrive at one of the more delicate frontiers of medieval beauty, the mouth. The lips, the teeth, and the breath were not just parts of the body. They were windows to the soul, or at least to your recent meals. In an age suspicious of laughter and fascinated by modesty, the mouth became both invitation and warning, a place where words, sins, and garlic all shared the same exit. In portraits from the period, people rarely smile. Lips stayed gently closed, turned neither up nor down. A fully open smile, the kind that shows teeth, was considered indecent. Teeth themselves were not trusted. They belonged too much to animals. Even a small flash could suggest wildness, appetite, or unseemly joy. Better to appear serene, as if your thoughts were so pure that they didn't need to escape your mouth at all. Still, the mouth had to be cared for. Bad breath was not just unpleasant, it was morally suspect. Medieval physicians believed that foul odours came from inner corruption, that the body was revealing secrets the soul had tried to hide. Clean breath, on the other hand, signalled harmony and virtue. You weren't merely fresh, you were spiritually balanced. To achieve this, people turned to herbs, seeds, and a surprising range of rituals. After meals, it was common to chew parsley, mint, or fennel seeds, a practice as old as dining itself. In wealthier households, clove buds or anise were favoured, not just for freshness, but as proof you could afford imported flavour. Pomanders, those little spheres of metal or carved ivory, often held bits of dried herbs or perfumed wax. They could be lifted discreetly to the nose during conversation, a gesture that politely disguised disgust while signalling refinement. Teeth cleaning was another matter. There were no toothbrushes as we know them, but chew sticks made from soft twigs served the purpose. You'd gnaw on one end until it frayed, then use the fibres to scrub the teeth. Powders made from crushed salt, ground shells, or even burnt rosemary added abrasion and scent. A few manuals recommended rinsing the mouth with wine or vinegar, a practice that did clean, though perhaps also eroded the teeth in the process. Honey and sage were sometimes mixed into pastes for polishing. People genuinely believed that sweetened herbs could coax the body toward balance. After all, if God had designed the garden, surely he had hidden hygiene in the leaves somewhere. But beauty in the mouth was not only physical, it was behavioural. The ideal voice was soft, the tone even, the laughter measured. To speak loudly was to betray impatience. To interrupt was to confess pride. True elegance meant using as few words as possible, and ideally, none. A noble conversation was a slow exchange of mild approval. More nods than sentences, more sighs than opinions. The art of silence, they said, protected both the tongue and the soul. Many believed excessive talking dried the spirit. Women in particular were encouraged to speak gently, if at all, lest their words attract attention best left unearned. A lady's voice was compared to music that should be played quietly and rarely. Even men practiced verbal moderation, their sentences wrapped in caution like fine cloth. At court, conversations were rehearsed performances, compliments drifted like smoke, graceful, insubstantial, easily forgotten. Humour existed, but softly. The most daring joke might be whispered behind a goblet of wine, and when laughter came, it was behind closed lips, producing only a warm hum. Smiling too widely could wrinkle the skin, and wrinkles were reminders of time, the one thing beauty could not afford to acknowledge. Of course, reality was less graceful. Garlic was a common seasoning, and dental care had limits. Historical records mention strong perfumes, and even stronger opinions about the state of other people's breath. A physician in the 15th century wrote that no man should speak before washing his mouth, lest his words carry offence as well as meaning. It's advice that could still improve modern meetings. In noble households, servants sometimes prepared small dishes of candied herbs or perfumed lozenges for their masters. These were tiny miracles of chemistry. Honey boiled with spices, left to harden into jewels that freshened the mouth and the ego. A handful in one's purse could mean the difference between admiration and avoidance. When all else failed, people relied on faith. Some carried small relics or amulets believed to protect the mouth from corruption. Others prayed before speaking important words, especially vows or confessions. Words themselves were sacred currency. To misuse them was moral bankruptcy. That belief made silence both fashionable and safe. Imagine a winter evening in a stone hall. Candles flicker. A group of nobles sits by the fire, the air thick with the scent of smoke and wine. Conversation drifts softly, punctuated by the faint clink of goblets. No one speaks loudly. A woman lifts a silver pomander to her nose, its perfume of cloves covering the faint smell of roast meat and humanity. Across from her, a man leans forward to whisper a compliment. His voice is low, his breath sweetened with mint and caution. The room hums with controlled warmth, as if everyone is pretending to be kinder and cleaner than they truly are. The medieval mouth, then, was not just a tool for eating or speech. It was a moral landscape, to be polished, perfumed, and guarded. Even the act of breathing carried meaning. Inhaling was purity. Exhaling required grace. Every scent, every sound, every word was a test of composure. And when all was said, which was very little, beauty settled once more into stillness. A perfect mouth was one that promised wisdom, never passion. A perfect voice was one that could vanish into silence without regret. If we follow the thread a little further, scent will grow stronger, perfume moving from the mouth to the entire body, where hygiene becomes ritual and fragrance turns into faith. Because in the medieval world, to smell good was to smell forgiven. Our quiet trail now carries us into the realm of scent, a kingdom of roses, vinegar, and self-deception. In the medieval world, cleanliness wasn't just a matter of soap and water. It was philosophy. It was survival. And often, it was mostly linen. To understand hygiene in the Middle Ages, you have to let go of modern ideas about showers and bubbles. For many people, washing too thoroughly was a spiritual risk. The church had long warned that public baths led to sin, a statement that was, to be fair, historically accurate. Bathhouses often doubled as places of gossip, flirtation, and occasionally economics. So bathing became morally complicated. To immerse yourself in warm water was to tempt both the flesh and the priest. And yet, no one wanted to smell like a sermon. So people found gentler, safer methods to remain presentable. Methods that turned cleanliness into ritual and fabric into armour. The most important of these was linen. Linen undergarments were the secret infrastructure of medieval hygiene. Worn close to the skin, they absorbed sweat and oils. Because linen could be boiled, scrubbed, and aired in sunlight, it served as the first and sometimes only line of defense against dirt. Changing linen frequently was a sign of refinement and moral discipline. You weren't just clean, you were virtuous enough to manage laundry. For those who could afford more elaborate care, there were dry baths. These involved rubbing the body with soft cloths dipped in scented water, rose, lavender, or even vinegar infused with herbs. The goal wasn't immersion, but illusion. The skin was refreshed, perfumed, and slightly sticky, but at least it smelled like effort. In wealthy homes, servants might carry bowls of scented water room to room, offering their lords the chance to dab away sin before supper. Perfume itself was a complex alchemy. It mixed faith with fascination, medicine with art. Oils of rose, violet, or clove were dissolved into wine or fat, then stored in tiny glass flasks. The resulting scent clung to fabrics, hair, and reputations. A faint trail of perfume signalled wealth and restraint. A heavy cloud of it suggested you were trying to hide something, usually successfully. Some perfumes were thought to heal as well as delight. Physicians claimed that pleasant smells could purify the air and strengthen the heart. People carried scented sachets in their sleeves or pinned small bouquets to their clothes. A cluster of rosemary and lavender wasn't just decoration. It was a portable health plan. In crowded cities where streets doubled as drainage, the theory made a certain practical sense. There was even a kind of theology to fragrance. The odour of sanctity was a genuine concept. The belief that saints, upon death, emitted the scent of flowers instead of decay. For ordinary people, the goal was more modest, to smell like someone who might someday qualify. Perfume became a bridge between hygiene and holiness. A sweet aroma hinted that your soul was equally well maintained. Men participated too. Knights and courtiers scented their gloves with rose oil and ambergris, the waxy substance that drifted ashore from Wales. A handshake could release a small puff of expensive virtue. Some even perfumed their armour padding, ensuring that chivalry smelled faintly of gardens rather than of endurance. Not all fragrances were equal, of course. The poor made do with herbs grown in kitchen gardens, mint, thyme, sage, or with vinegar steeped in petals. The wealthy imported spices from distant lands, bottling the East in tiny flasks. The more exotic the smell, the higher your prestige. You could practically chart the map of trade by following the scent of noble gatherings. Despite the effort, real bathing never disappeared entirely. Some monasteries kept strict washing schedules. Pilgrims cleansed before entering shrines. And certain towns maintained public baths, though they gradually declined as plague fears grew. By the late Middle Ages, water itself began to seem suspicious, not morally, but medically. People thought illness floated in steam. Better to remain dry, perfumed, and grateful. The sensory experience of a medieval evening was extraordinary. Imagine a chamber lit by torches and candles, shadows trembling across plaster walls. The air smells of beeswax and wet stone. A lady passes, her linen rustling, leaving behind the ghost of roses and vinegar. A man bows, the scent of leather gloves and clove rising like a sigh. Somewhere in the corner someone drops a pomander, the little orb of metal packed with herbs, and the room briefly smells like Christmas and anxiety. Perfume wasn't simply indulgence, it was communication. To smell good meant you were in control of yourself. To smell neutral meant you were modest. To smell bad meant you needed confession or coin. A person's scent could reveal their rank faster than their accent. Even in crowded feasts, people could identify others by fragrance. A social signature trailing invisibly through the air. There were, of course, accidents. Too much ambergris could make the air thick enough to chew. A few drops of musk could turn from alluring to alarming within minutes. But generally, the rule was simple. If the scent made others sigh instead of sneeze, you'd succeeded. Behind all these habits lingered the unspoken truth. Water was fearsome, but beauty demanded its mimicry. The medieval body was kept in delicate balance, clean by proxy, holy by fragrance. Every drop of perfume was a quiet defiance of decay, a way to say, I may not be immortal, but at least I won't smell like mortality. As the candles burn lower, you can almost feel that air, heavy with scent, alive with quiet purpose. Each breath is half history, half confession, and as we follow the fragrance further, the trail will lead us from cleanliness into conscience, into the strange mirror where beauty met sin and virtue became just another cosmetic. As we drift further into the candlelight of this story, the mirror finally appears. You might expect it to be made of polished silver, something delicate, fragile, perhaps flattering. But in the medieval world, a mirror was never just for checking appearances. It was a moral instrument, a reminder that every reflection came with consequences. Imagine a small, handheld disc, faintly warped, catching firelight. A lady sits before it, her veil pinned back, her rouge barely visible. Somewhere beyond the walls, a church bell tolls. The sound seeps into the room like slow incense, reminding her that beauty was permitted only in moderation, and that moderation was rarely satisfying. Sermons of the age spoke endlessly about the dangers of vanity. Preachers warned women that mirrors were traps for the soul, shiny little doorways to sin. To spend too long gazing into one was to risk falling in love with your own reflection, a miniature form of idolatry. Men weren't immune either, though the rules were less strict. A man could admire himself if he claimed it was for the glory of God's creation. A woman could not, at least not out loud. Still, mirrors sold well. Even priests owned them. Some church officials ordered mirrors engraved with tiny crucifixes, as if the image of Christ could balance out the image of whoever was staring back. The logic was simple. If temptation was going to happen, it might as well happen under supervision. Within this contradiction, medieval beauty existed like a secret confession, whispered, visible, and instantly regretted. Women powdered, painted, and perfumed themselves, then apologized for it in church. They promised moderation, but moderation was a flexible word. One chronicler wrote that women sinned most easily through the window of the face. The statement, though absurd, carried power. It turned the female body into a moral battlefield where the eyes, the mouth, and especially the hair waged a daily war against virtue. Temptation was not an act, it was a haircut. That's why women covered their heads, hid their figures, and lowered their eyes. Modesty was not just a virtue, it was survival. A flash of hair could invite both scandal and a sermon, and yet the same preachers who condemned beauty also depended on it. Churches themselves were decorated like brides, draped in gold and light, perfumed with incense. God's house was apparently allowed to sparkle. For those navigating this paradox, guilt became an accessory. The truly elegant wore it lightly. You could almost see it shimmering above the lace and jewels, that faint awareness that every compliment carried risk. The more admired you were, the more you owed heaven an apology. There's a story from a 14th century sermon about a woman who spent too long preparing for Mass. She powdered her face, adjusted her veil, and added just a touch more blush before stepping out. On the street she passed a priest. The look he gave her was part disappointment, part inventory. She blushed for real this time, pulled out a linen cloth and wiped the colour away before entering the church. Inside, she prayed twice as long to make up for it. The priest later used her as an example in a sermon about vanity, forgetting perhaps that he'd been staring first. In art, the mirror became both symbol and warning. Painters used it to represent self-knowledge but also temptation. A saint holding a mirror might be showing humility, acknowledging her reflection only to turn away from it. A courtesan holding the same mirror was condemned for the opposite reason. Context was everything, and hypocrisy was timeless. For many, beauty itself became proof of divine favour, a confusing doctrine that encouraged admiration while condemning pride. Pale skin, bright eyes, a calm expression. These were seen as signs of an orderly soul. But if you tried too hard to achieve them, you risked spiritual decay. It was an impossible equation, one that required constant repentance just to stay fashionable. The mirror, for its part, never judged. It simply returned whatever stood before it. Powdered cheeks, lowered eyes, half-forgiven smiles. In its curved surface, virtue and vanity looked identical. If you could stand quietly in a medieval bedroom, you might hear this moral drama unfolding. The soft scrape of a stool, the whisper of fabric, a woman, alone, looking at herself by candlelight. Not admiring, not exactly ashamed, simply studying the line between what she believes and what she desires. The candle trembles, her reflection flickers, and for a moment, even she cannot tell which version is real. Beyond the window, a sermon hums through the evening air. The priest's voice rises and falls, echoing against stone. He speaks of Eve, of pride, of temptation through sight. Inside, the woman straightens her veil and folds her hands. She's not rebelling, she's surviving. Because in her world, To be beautiful was to invite attention, and to invite attention was to risk everything. The irony is that none of this worked. Temptation didn't disappear, it adapted. The more rules imposed on beauty, the more creative beauty became. Faces turned paler, fabrics finer, gestures subtler. The forbidden simply became fashionable in disguise. And so the medieval mirror reflected more than faces. It showed the human desire to be seen, to exist as something more than duty. Underneath the sermons and powders and moral arithmetic was a simple truth. People wanted to feel lovely, even if only for a moment before they apologized for it. As the candle burns lower, the reflection fades, leaving behind nothing but the faint smell of wax and rosewater. The sermon outside ends. Silence fills the room again, thick and safe. For a little while, even guilt seems tired. If we follow that silence further, we'll reach the laws that tried to regulate beauty itself. Laws that measured morality and fabric, stitched modesty into wardrobe, and turned obedience into fashion. Because if mirrors couldn't control vanity, perhaps the tailor could. If we follow the echo of those sermons a little further, we find that mirrors weren't the only judges of beauty. Governments and kings tried their hand at it too. For a few centuries, Europe decided that morality could be measured in fabric, that silk and sin were suspiciously related. Beauty, once a private temptation, became a matter of public regulation. These were the sumptuary laws, a phrase that sounds polite until you realise it meant the state telling you what you were allowed to wear. They appeared across England, France, Italy and Spain, written in flowing Latin and enforced with equal parts anxiety and envy. The idea was simple: the world must look orderly, even if it wasn't. So clothing became a social border you could literally see. Silk was reserved for nobles, velvet for the near nobles, fur for the rich. If you were poor, you wore wool and were expected to look grateful about it. The wrong fabric could get you fined, arrested, or publicly shamed. One English law in the 14th century even listed which types of fur were appropriate for which rank, a sort of moral menagerie, with stoats for the lords and rabbits for the hopeful. The church approved, naturally. It had always encouraged visible hierarchy. God, after all, had arranged creation in layers: angels, humans, animals, peasants. Social order was merely divine architecture translated into wardrobe. But as usual, enforcement proved difficult. People loved imitation almost as much as they loved salvation. Merchants grew wealthy, and wealthy merchants wanted to dress like the nobility whose taxes they paid. Tailors obliged, creating a booming underground industry of almost silk, nearly velvet and imitation fur. Officials tried to keep up, issuing new decrees every few years, adjusting thread counts and colour permissions, but fashion moved faster than faith. A rule that banned scarlet on Monday would be out of date by Thursday. There were inevitably absurdities. One law forbade the wearing of gold embroidery except on religious feast days. Another restricted the size of sleeves, declaring that fabric wider than a man's face indicated pride. Inspectors sometimes measured them in the street, an early form of fashion policing that combined the worst of moral philosophy and tape measurement. Colours were regulated too. Deep reds and purples were symbols of power, meant only for royalty and high clergy. Commoners were advised to stay safely within the moral spectrum of brown, grey or faded blue. Yet, portraits from the period show peasants sneaking bits of brightness. A red ribbon here, a green sleeve there. Small rebellions stitched in secret. It was the medieval version of designer knockoffs, minus the lawyers. And then there were the laws about women's adornments. A wife could not outshine her husband's income. Her jewels, lace and headdress were to reflect his earnings, or more accurately, his ego. The richer the man, the taller the hat. One chronicler wrote that a woman's hennin should rise no higher than the worth of her household. This was, of course, impossible to measure, but the symbolism was too poetic to resist. The irony is that enforcing modesty only made beauty more inventive. When pearls were banned, people embroidered beads of glass. When lace was restricted, they learned to knot thread so delicately it fooled the eye. Even simplicity became its own art form. Humble fabrics cut so perfectly that they whispered luxury. The courts of Europe turned into quiet theatres of defiance. In France, noble women flaunted forbidden jewels by calling them gifts from saints. In England, a merchant's daughter might wear silk accidentally inherited from her aunt, who just happened to have died in better circumstances. And in Italy, where the love of beauty was practically a civic duty, officials gave up entirely, choosing to tax vanity instead of ban it. Men found loopholes too. While women were scolded for decoration, men's clothing became a carnival of hypocrisy. Doublets were padded, sleeves inflated, and shoes lengthened into absurd points that curled upward like punctuation marks on arrogance. Clergymen denounced these fashions as proof of moral decline. The nobles simply nodded, then ordered longer shoes. If you look closely at a medieval painting, you can almost hear the hum of this tension, the rustle of forbidden fabrics, the quiet thrill of disobedience. Lace edges gleam where they shouldn't. Rings sparkle on fingers that technically can't afford them. Even the angels in church frescoes seem overdressed, draped in gold while preaching humility. Behind every decree stood the same fear that beauty could disrupt order. A world obsessed with hierarchy needed everyone to look like they belonged. The tailor, the merchant, the seamstress. These were the hidden revolutionaries stitching social chaos one hem at a time. The humour, if you can call it that, lies in how familiar it feels. Every age invents its own moral dress code. The Middle Ages just happened to write theirs into law. They tried to legislate humility, not realising that humility with embroidery was still humility's distant cousin. And yet, within all this absurd regulation, something oddly human glimmers. People wanted to express themselves, to claim small joys, to shine, just a little, even under divine supervision. They found ways to make obedience look graceful. They turned lace into quiet protest. Imagine again that noble hall. A lady enters, her gown technically legal, her sleeves suspiciously wide. The clerk at the door hesitates, measuring her with his eyes, but the candlelight forgives her. The lace catches it perfectly, scattering light across the room like soft rebellion. Around her, everyone pretends not to notice, and in that collective silence, beauty wins another tiny victory. By the time dawn arrives, the laws are already outdated. Fashion has moved on, faster than theology, cleverer than authority. It always does. And as the sun touches the high windows of the cathedral, even the stone saints look slightly amused. From here, the story shifts eastward, toward a different kind of order, where beauty became discipline and symmetry itself was weaponized. Because in another empire, far from these lace-bound halls, perfection wore armor and marched to the rhythm of fear. The trail of fabric and lace now leads us far from Europe, across mountains and deserts, into the disciplined heart of another empire, the land of the Persian Immortals. Here, beauty was not a mirror or a veil. It was formation, it was geometry in motion, and it was terrifying. Under Cyrus the Great, the Persian Empire stretched from the Aegean Sea to the edge of India, an expanse so vast that order itself became a kind of art. To hold that empire together, Cyrus created a standing army of elite soldiers, always 10,000 strong. They were called the Immortals not because they couldn't die, but because whenever one fell, another immediately took his place. The number never changed. 10,000 was not just a figure. It was a symbol of perfection, the aesthetic of endurance. Imagine them marching, rows of armour that shimmered like fish scales, silk robes gleaming beneath bronze. Each soldier carried a spear, a bow, a short sword, and a wicker shield painted in bright patterns. Their hair was oiled, their beards combed and shaped. This was not a mob of fighters, it was choreography. War became ceremony. Order itself became beautiful. The Immortals were as much theatre as they were military. When they entered battle, they moved in absolute silence, their sandals whispering through dust. The sight was meant to unnerve as much as the fight itself. Enemies facing them didn't just see soldiers, they saw a pattern, endless, precise, unbreakable. Even the sound of marching feet, soft and steady, carried a strange grace, like a prayer recited by thousands at once. Perfection, though, requires maintenance. Behind this elegance was a small army of administrators, scribes, and quartermasters, people who ensured the illusion of immortality continued without interruption. Records were kept in wax tablets and scrolls. Replacements were trained before they were needed. One soldier might die in battle at dawn, but by sunset his number was filled, his equipment polished, his position occupied. Bureaucracy became resurrection. If you picture this too, literally it sounds grim. But to the Persians it was harmony. Every piece of the army, from commander to cook, was part of a greater design, like notes in a song too grand for any one person to hear in full. The beauty lay in the continuity, in the idea that no matter what happened, the pattern remained. There was, however, another kind of artistry beneath the armour. Persian culture valued balance, symmetry of mind and body, elegance even in strength. Their warriors trained not only in combat but in etiquette. A noble soldier was expected to speak softly, eat sparingly, and maintain calm under pressure. Courage was not loud, it was measured. The Immortals were feared, but they were also admired for restraint, a rare combination in any century. Their uniforms blended practicality with splendour. Silk undergarments made movement easier and prevented chafing beneath armour. The outer robes shimmered with colours, deep blue, crimson, gold, each hue chosen with symbolic care. Blue for loyalty, red for power, gold for divine favour. The result was a vision of war that looked, from a distance, almost peaceful, an army moving like a living tapestry. The Persians understood something that many cultures forget. Fear can be beautiful if it's orderly enough. The sight of thousands advancing in perfect silence, banners rippling like flames, created awe rather than chaos. It was beauty turned into control. An empire that could choreograph its soldiers could choreograph the world. Even their weapons reflected this philosophy. The short sword was curved slightly, not for brutality but for elegance of motion. Bows were polished until they caught the sun. Shields were often lacquered, their surfaces decorated with intricate designs, flowers, stars, patterns of eternity. To hold such a shield was to carry art into war. This harmony between violence and grace astonished outsiders. Greek historians like Herodotus described the Immortals with a mixture of admiration and unease. They wrote of their precision, their luxury, their unshakable calm. The Greeks valued individual heroism, the Persians valued collective perfection. Each soldier was a note in a grand design, and that design terrified the West. For the Persians, immortality was never about surviving death. It was about continuity, the refusal to let disorder win. The empire could lose a man, a city, even a battle, but the image of its power endured. 10,000 that never died was not a boast. It was a philosophy. Picture it now, dawn breaking over the desert, the horizon still grey, the air heavy with dust, then a shimmer, rows of silk and metal catching the first light, spears tilt in unison, bows at the ready. The line begins to move, slow and deliberate, as if the earth itself has decided to rise. There is no shouting, no chaos, just rhythm, the sound of footsteps, of cloth brushing against armour, of empire exhaling. Somewhere, a scribe marks a name off a list. Another writes a replacement, Another seals a wax tablet. The cycle continues. This too is beauty, not the fragile kind painted on a noblewoman's cheek, but the cold, magnificent order of a world that refuses to admit loss. The Immortals would endure for centuries, their legend outliving the empire that created them. Even in decline, the image remained. Disciplined men wrapped in silk, bound by symmetry, proof that human beings can turn even death into performance. As we walk onward through history, the rhythm will change again. Order will falter, the drums will grow louder, and where obedience once stood like a polished statue, rebellion will begin to breathe. Because beauty, once confined to mirrors and armies, was about to pick up a sword of its own. If we follow the echo of their footsteps a little further, the legend of the Immortals opens like a clock, gears, levers, and perfectly timed breath. To understand their beauty, you have to forget chaos, forget battle cries and frenzy. The Persian army at its finest was an instrument, and the Immortals were the melody that never lost its rhythm. Each morning, before dawn broke over the desert, the camp awoke like an organism. Fires lit in silence. Armor plates clinked softly, polished until they caught the first threads of light. Horses stamped once as if rehearsed. Orders were given in whispers, gestures, nods. By the time the sun rose, the army already looked like a design. Colour and movement balanced so precisely that even nature seemed to hesitate, unwilling to disrupt it. Perfection, of course, was not spontaneous. It was practiced, written, and counted. Behind every soldier was a scribe who recorded his name, his rank, his equipment, and his family. When one man fell, another's name was already waiting on the tablet. Supplies moved through the empire on prearranged schedules, routes carved into memory by repetition. Roads were cleared before the soldiers reached them. Messages travelled by runners, relays of breath and ink. The empire breathed through paper, parchment, and dust. It wasn't just organisation, it was faith in systems. The Persians believed that discipline itself was divine, that order reflected cosmic truth. The Immortals were its earthly echo. Even the king seated on his throne was part of the machinery. He didn't rule above it, but within it, the way a heartbeat rules the body by keeping time. There's a strange serenity in that kind of order. You can almost feel the rhythm. Thousands of men inhaling and exhaling together, steps aligned, weapons glinting in the same pattern. The Greeks, who worshipped individuality, found it eerie, but to the Persians it was beautiful. Unity as art, obedience as grace. Their training was relentless but methodical. A boy born into a soldier's household began drills early. Archery, running, swordsmanship, but also lessons in etiquette and composure. Strength was useless without restraint. Good warrior could strike hard. A perfect one could stand perfectly still. Even the act of waiting was a test. In their silence, the Immortals practiced victory long before the battle began. They ate sparingly, lived neatly, spoke little. Their tents were arranged in geometric rows, each identical. At night, torches burned at precise intervals, forming constellations on the ground. From a distance, the camp looked like a second sky. This was empire as symmetry, human order mirroring divine design. Inside this calm, the bureaucrats thrived. Scribes wrote reports with calligraphy so delicate that even the ink looked disciplined. Each stroke was a thread of control. The empire's administrators, often unseen, kept the army alive. One chronicler wrote that Persia was a kingdom of clerks and soldiers, of ink and iron. The two were inseparable. The pen recorded what the sword achieved, and the sword enforced what the pen declared. It was, in its way, the most elegant collaboration in history. But such perfection had a cost. The more the system succeeded, the less room there was for error or humanity. A soldier's individuality dissolved into formation, his life into ledger lines. When he died, his name was scratched out, replaced by another, the list restored to 10,000. The empire never mourned, it simply adjusted. Death was not tragedy, only accounting. Still, there was dignity in it. For those born into the pattern, obedience brought peace. There was comfort in knowing one's place, in belonging to something vast and precise. The Immortals didn't fight for glory, they fought for continuity. And that in its strange way was immortality enough. Their aesthetic extended beyond the battlefield. Persian architecture echoed the same rhythm. Columns aligned like soldiers, friezes depicting ranks of men in perfect balance, each identical, each unique in tiny detail. Even the royal palaces of Persepolis seemed to breathe with that same quiet confidence. Every stone was carved to fit its neighbour so closely that light itself had to ask permission to pass between them. This devotion to order impressed outsiders and terrified them. The Greek historian Xenophon, writing decades later, described Persian discipline with reluctant admiration. He called it the beauty of obedience. To him, it was unnatural, almost inhuman, a world where no one argued, where even chaos obeyed. But perhaps that was the point. In the Persian imagination, control was the highest form of grace. It's easy to forget that such precision had a sound, not the clang of swords, but the sigh of silk beneath armour, the scratch of pens on parchment, the low hum of 1,000 synchronized breaths. To walk among the Immortals was to hear history rehearsing itself. Picture a scribe at dusk seated near the edge of camp. Before him lies a wax tablet filled with names. He dips his stylus in oil, scratches out one name, writes another. The wax gleams in torchlight, smooth and new. Around him, the air smells of dust and cumin and something faintly metallic. Somewhere beyond, soldiers shift in unison, adjusting their shields. The sound is like the ocean, steady and inevitable. The machine continues to breathe. Yet even this perfect rhythm contained its flaw. Empires built on obedience forget the warmth of spontaneity. The Persians' greatest strength, their discipline, would someday become their weakness. Against the unpredictable tactics of the Greeks, their harmony cracked. Perfection met chaos, and chaos remembered how to win. But that reckoning belongs to another dawn. For now, the Immortals still march, the ink still dries, the empire still hums. The night is full of patterns, the torches flicker in perfect intervals, and somewhere a scribe closes his tablet, satisfied that the number 10,000 has been restored once more. As the stars rise above the desert, the line between soldier and system blurs completely. You can no longer tell where the man ends and the empire begins. Together they form a single organism, one vast, silent heartbeat moving through time. And in the stillness between those heartbeats, history inhales. Soon, it will exhale in blood and dust. The silence of order will meet the noise of resistance. But before the noise begins, listen, just for a moment, to the sound of an empire breathing perfectly, unaware that it is mortal after all. The desert quiet eventually meets a sound it can't control, the sound of men dying. Even the most elegant rhythm falters when it meets the edge of a mountain. For the Persians, that moment came at a narrow pass in Greece, where their perfection finally faced something it couldn't catalogue. The place was called Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. The year no longer matters. What matters is that here, the machine met the flaw in its design, the unpredictability of courage. The Immortals had been undefeated for generations. They had marched across kingdoms, their formations neat, their banners pure geometry. They fought as if they were made of mathematics, precise, unending, serene. But on that narrow path between cliffs and sea, order met defiance. The Greeks who stood against them were few, perhaps only a few hundred, but they fought like chaos given form. They had no symmetry, no bureaucracy. What they had instead was the strange energy that appears when people know they're going to die. They broke the rhythm, they screamed, they improvised, and in doing so, They reminded the world that beauty built entirely on control cannot survive a single unscripted heartbeat. The battle lasted for days. The Immortals advanced as they always did, silent, disciplined, unstoppable. Arrows darkened the sky, spears clashed, dust rose in thick curtains. The air tasted of iron and salt. For the first time, the perfect formation trembled. The narrow terrain stripped away their advantage. Their movement, once graceful, became tangled. Men slipped on rocks slick with sweat and blood. Commands meant to flow like music echoed instead in confusion. History remembers the Greeks as heroes, but what's remarkable is how human the Persians became in defeat. When the rhythm broke, they did not vanish. They bled, stumbled, shouted, and kept fighting. For the first time, the world saw the Immortals not as symbols, but as men, mortal after all. There is a kind of beauty in that too, the moment when the mask cracks and something living peers through. The Persian silence, once sacred, filled with the noise of survival. Gasping, struggling, cursing, praying. Even perfection, it turns out, can't help but breathe when afraid. The battle was lost. The Greeks held the pass long enough to become legend, and the Persians withdrew, their symmetry dented but not destroyed. The empire endured, but the myth changed. Immortality had always been a metaphor, but now it came with an asterisk. Even the most polished order could rust in time. The king, Xerxes, was said to have watched the fight from a throne set high on a hillside. He saw his soldiers move like waves, then like fragments. The scene was both magnificent and horrifying on the collapse of choreography. Perhaps he realized in that moment that beauty rooted in obedience cannot survive freedom. But empires rarely learn in time. They continue polishing the mask even as it cracks. After Thermopylae, Persian discipline became a legend told in two tones: admiration and melancholy. The Immortals still marched, still replaced their fallen, still gleamed beneath the sun, but something invisible had shifted. The world had seen them bleed. The idea of perfection had lost its silence. Poets later wrote of the battle as a meeting of opposites: order versus chaos, silence versus shout, eternity versus moment. And as always, the truth lay somewhere in between. The Greeks won, yes, but they too would eventually fall. Every perfection meets its rival. Every empire finds its pass. If you could stand there now, centuries later, you'd still smell salt on the wind. The stones remember heat and sweat. The sea still murmurs where bodies once fell. History never really ends. It just changes temperature. For the Persians who survived, there was no shame in loss. They returned home, tended wounds, and rejoined the formation. Another soldier took each place. The number was restored, the illusion remade. 10,000 once more, but quieter now, more thoughtful. The empire's heart kept beating, a little slower, a little wiser. And somewhere, in a courtyard far from battle, a craftsman hammered gold into a new shield. He shaped its edge into a curve that caught the light differently, a reminder that beauty, even in defeat, adapts. The Persians would continue to rule for generations, but Thermopylae lingered in memory like a scar that gleamed instead of fading. The story of the Immortals is, in the end, the story of humanity itself. We build systems to outlast us, write rules to preserve us, design patterns to protect us. But all it takes is one small act of defiance, a voice, a stone, a spark, to remind the pattern that it's made of people. If you listen carefully, you can still hear it. The faint echo of sandals in dust, the measured breath of a machine rediscovering its heart. The rhythm is slower now, less perfect, more human. And perhaps that is what makes it beautiful. From here, the wind shifts again, carrying us across time and geography, from men who marched in order to women who refused to. Because in another chapter of history, beauty will trade its silk for steel, It will stop asking for permission, pick up a bow and ride into legend. The mirror will shatter completely and its pieces will glitter on the battlefield. The trail of dust and iron now opens onto a wider sky. The air sharpens and the ground flattens into endless grass. We have left marble and silk behind. This is the steppe, a sea of land that stretches farther than memory. Out here, beauty and survival ride the same horse. The people of the steppe lived without palaces, without cathedrals, without mirrors. Their reflections appeared in puddles, in the eyes of their animals, in the polished curve of a bronze cup. And yet, for all that simplicity, they shaped one of history's most persistent myths, the warrior woman. Centuries before knights clanked through Europe, the Scythians ruled this world of wind and speed. They buried their dead with bows and ornaments, gold trinkets and bronze arrowheads laid side by side. For a long time, historians thought the women's weapons were ceremonial, pretty accessories for poetic graves. Then archaeologists began finding bones, narrow, elegant bones marked with cuts, arrow wounds, healed fractures. The myth of the Amazons stopped being legend and started looking suspiciously like reality. In these graves, women rested beside their horses, their jewellery twisted among quivers and harnesses. One skeleton showed the telltale curve of an archer's spine. Another bore the scar of a blade to the forearm, a wound that had healed, which meant she had lived to fight again. Beauty, on the steppe, wasn't fragile. It was velocity given shape. To a Scythian, there was no contradiction between grace and strength. They wore patterned trousers, soft leather boots, and tunics belted at the waist. Clothing made for movement, not modesty. Men and women dressed alike, rode alike, and sometimes died alike. The grass didn't care about gender, it only cared how fast you could ride across it. The Greeks, watching from their marble cities, were both horrified and fascinated. They called these women Amazons, imagining a society ruled entirely by them. In their myths, the Amazons were wild, fierce, seductive, and tragic, the perfect blend of desire and warning. The Greeks fought them in stories, loved them, in poems, and built statues of them in defeat. It was easier to turn them into legend than to admit they had existed. But they had, and not only in Scythia. From the Black Sea to the Altai Mountains, archaeologists keep finding the same traces. Graves of women with weapons, evidence of cavalry skills, arrowheads still lodged in ribs that once drew breath. They weren't exceptions. They were part of the pattern. Imagine a line of riders galloping over the horizon. Their hair streams like banners, their braids heavy with beads. The sound of hooves rolls like thunder. Bows rise and fall, arrows fly. And for a moment the steppe itself seems to move with them, a single, living rhythm of power and dust. Their beauty lay in motion. They had no use for stillness, no patience for fainting couches or powdered cheeks. Their perfume was sweat and smoke, their jewellery the glint of sunlight on bronze. Strength was their elegance. Freedom was their skincare routine. To live that life was to understand a different kind of devotion. These women hunted beside their fathers, fought beside their husbands, and were buried beside their sons. Their religion was the wind, invisible, unyielding, always moving. There's a tenderness hidden in that world too. Archaeologists have found combs carved with animals, small mirrors of polished bronze, and amulets shaped like birds. Even warriors needed reminders of gentleness. The steppe was vast, but loneliness was larger. Perhaps a mirror carried into battle wasn't vanity at all, just proof that you existed. The Scythian women left behind no poetry of their own, only traces written in gold and bone. But others remembered them. Centuries later, when new empires rose, the Mongols, the Turks, the Russians, stories of the mounted women returned, each retelling more embellished than the last. Some said they cut off a breast to draw the bow more easily. Others said they lived apart from men entirely, taking lovers only for the sake of children. Most of it was invention, but the truth didn't need exaggeration. Reality had already been radical enough. Historians now think that as many as 1 in 5 Scythian warriors may have been female. It wasn't equality in the modern sense, but something more pragmatic. Life on the steppe was hard. Everyone worked. Everyone fought. Beauty under such conditions wasn't something to protect. It was something to wield. In this landscape, you learned early that tenderness and ferocity could share the same body. You could ride all day, fight at dawn, and still braid your hair before sleep. The Scythians buried their women with combs not because vanity survived war, but because war never erased womanhood. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel it. The wind against your face, the vibration of hooves through the ground, the bowstring pressing into your palm. The air smells of grass, leather, and wild sage. You're moving so fast that the earth seems still. This, perhaps, was the first beauty standard that asked nothing of weakness. When the Greeks told their stories later, they called these women foreign, monstrous, unnatural. But what they really meant was ungoverned. The Scythians had built a world where beauty didn't have to apologize for its strength, where grace and danger were the same thing. That frightened those who built statues instead of saddles. As centuries turned, the steppe riders vanished, absorbed into larger empires. Their bones slept under endless grass, yet their legend never did. Every time someone tells a story about a woman who fights, some whisper of that wind returns. The daughters of the steppe ride again, unseen, uncounted, unstoppable. And if we follow the sound of those hoofbeats long enough, they'll lead us to other lands where beauty once burned and ruled, to queens who fought empires, to women who became fire itself. Because after the wind comes flame, and beauty, it seems, always remembers how to burn. If we follow the hoofbeats through time, they begin to echo like drums. The wind of the steppe turns warmer, heavier, thick with smoke. We've arrived in the lands of rebellion, the places where women no longer rode beside armies but led them, where beauty stopped whispering and began to shout. Somewhere in West Africa, the grass gives way to red earth. The air tastes of iron and heat. The kingdom of Dahomey rises from the haze, its palace walls painted in ochre, its courtyards filled with the scent of palm wine and sweat. Here lived the Agogi, the women warriors known to outsiders as the Dahomey Amazons. They guarded their king, patrolled the borders, and sometimes commanded the wars themselves. European visitors wrote about them with uneasy fascination. They described the Agogi as fierce, disciplined, and terrifyingly calm. They trained with machetes and muskets, climbed thorny walls without hesitation, and marched barefoot over broken ground. In battle, they sang, not songs of mercy, but songs that dared the enemy to look them in the eye. They fought like the Persian Immortals, only louder. Their beauty wasn't delicate, it was composure under heat, precision amid noise. They shaved their heads to keep cool, oiled their skin until it glowed like bronze, and wore belts of leopard teeth and shells. Each woman moved with the grace of ritual, as if combat were a kind of dance. In truth it was. Their drills were rhythmic, almost ceremonial, hundreds of bodies turning and striking in unison, their voices rising and falling like breath. To outsiders, it seemed impossible that women could be both so disciplined and so dangerous. But to Dahomey, they were the empire's pride, symbols of courage, devotion, and balance. Their beauty was not the opposite of strength, it was the proof of it. When French colonial forces invaded in the 19th century, the Agogi met them head-on. The French had rifles, the women had resolve, sharpened by centuries. Reports say they advanced in perfect formation, chanting, faces painted red for protection and fearlessness. Even when wounded, they refused retreat. Their leader was said to stand calmly amid the gunfire, her voice carrying through the smoke, "We will dance again, even if it is in the afterlife." That line still lingers in Dahomey's memory, half myth, half history, all truth. Because the Agoji understood something the world keeps forgetting. You can kill people, but not rhythm. Now the drumbeat carries us farther north, across seas and centuries, to the misted fields of Britain. Here, rebellion takes another form. A queen crowned by rage. Her name was Boudica, and her story still burns. When the Romans invaded, they brought roads, taxes, and humiliation. After her husband's death, Roman officials flogged her and assaulted her daughters to make a point. The point backfired. Within months, Boudica had united the tribes of Britain. Her army swelled like a storm. Her chariot wheels were tipped with blades. Roman historians, unable to ignore her, described her with the kind of fascination reserved for natural disasters. Her hair, they said, was a mane of red gold fire that flowed to her hips. Her eyes were fierce, her voice commanding. She wore a great necklace of gold, a torque, and a gown of many colours. She didn't need to look holy, she looked inevitable. When she spoke, it was not as a queen seeking pity, but as a mother avenging children. Her army swept through Roman towns, burning them to ash. Colchester fell first, then London. Her soldiers torched temples and shattered statues. Roman accounts called her cruel, which was fair. She was done being patient. For a brief, blinding moment, she won. Britain belonged to her. Then, as always, empire reasserted itself. The Romans regrouped, lured her army into open ground, and crushed it. The rebellion ended in smoke. Boudica, refusing capture, drank poison. She died as she had lived, ungoverned. Her beauty, like the Agogi's, was not softness, but conviction. She turned vengeance into ceremony, grief into armour. Even in defeat, her legend grew. The Romans built statues of her later, though they never quite decided whether she was a monster or a martyr. History, as usual, preferred its women fierce only after they were safely dead. Across continents and centuries, these queens of fire shared something beyond weapons, a belief that beauty could burn through hierarchy. The Agogi's discipline, Boudica's fury. Both were languages of power written on the body. In one hand a spear, in the other a mirror reflecting the flames. Imagine standing among them. The air is hot, vibrating with drums and shouts. Smoke rolls across the fields. Boudica's chariot gleams as it cuts through the haze. The Agogi advance through red dust, their machetes flashing in rhythm. For a heartbeat, time collapses. Bronze meets iron, chant meets scream, and beauty is indistinguishable from war. What joins them is not gender or geography, but defiance made graceful. The Agogi fought because they were told they shouldn't. Boudica fought because she was told she couldn't. Together they remind you that rebellion has a scent: metal, ash, and courage. And that sometimes the most elegant thing a person can do is refuse to kneel. When the flames fade, the silence that follows is not peace, but memory cooling into legend. The drums stop, the smoke drifts upward, and the world pretends to return to order. But the echo remains, and if you listen closely enough, you can still hear it. The rustle of spears, the whisper of silk against skin, the low hum of women who turn their rage into ritual. The fire doesn't go out, it only changes shape. As we follow the ember trail onward, the world quiets again. From the chaos of battle, we move toward a different kind of courage, the still, disciplined bravery of faith. In Japan, another figure waits, a warrior who fought like thunder but prayed like dawn, a woman whose sword sang with belief. The fires of rebellion fade and the air grows cooler, quieter, but not still. The rhythm changes from drums to heartbeat, from march to meditation. The next figures step out of the smoke like two echoes answering each other across continents. One from the east, one from the west. One carries a sword, the other carries a banner painted with a cross. Both carry conviction so pure it looks almost fragile. You meet Tomo Gozen first. Japan, 12th century. The Genpei War rages between two clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, a struggle so fierce it feels personal to heaven itself. In a culture built on duty and silence, Tomoe rides like a contradiction made flesh. Chroniclers described her as a warrior worth 1,000 men. Her hair was long, her bow strong, her expression unreadable. She fought not for chaos, but for precision. Every arrow loosed like a verse in a poem only she understood. In battle, Tomo was said to be fearless, calm as winter. She led charges, cut through enemy lines, and returned without a scratch. Some stories claim she once decapitated a samurai twice her size, then calmly adjusted her sleeve before remounting her horse. Others say she fought until her commander ordered her to flee, not because she was losing, but because the men couldn't bear to die beside someone who fought better. The legends disagree on her fate. Some say she vanished after the war, removing her armour and living quietly as a nun. Others insist she never stopped riding, that she became a spirit of the battlefield itself, invisible, eternal, waiting. Whatever truth lies beneath the myth, her presence endures. Beauty as discipline, grace sharpened into blade. In Japanese art, Tomo is often painted mid-motion, her robe flowing, her face serene. There's no rage, no vanity, no doubt, only focus. Her sword isn't raised in anger, it's lifted like an offering. She makes battle look like balance, destruction like ceremony. Her armour gleams, her hair curves like brushwork. If the Scythian women were wind and the Dahomey warriors were fire, Tomo is water, calm, reflective and deadly when stirred. Across the world and 3 centuries later, another woman walks into history carrying a different kind of weapon, faith. Her name is Jeanne. You know her as Joan of Arc, France, 15th century. The 100 Years' War has bled the land dry. Armies shuffle through mud, cities crumble, kings pray to absent gods, and then, in a small village, a teenage girl claims that the saints are speaking to her, that she's been chosen to save France. She wears men's armour, cuts her hair short, and leads soldiers twice her age. Her banner is white, painted with golden lilies and the name of God. To some she's a miracle, to others a heretic. But no one can ignore her. Her voice carries like thunder through ranks of exhausted men. She doesn't kill, she commands. And somehow, it works. Under her guidance, the French army wins battles it had no business winning. She rides at the front unarmed except for her standard. Arrows fall, she does not flinch. Even when wounded, she keeps the banner aloft. The sight of it, a girl leading warriors, breaks something in the old order. She becomes a living contradiction. Purity in armour, innocence directing death. But beauty that refuses to obey rarely survives the institutions it threatens. When she's captured, she's accused of a witchcraft. Her trial a performance of fear disguised as justice. They strip her of armour, her symbol of agency, and demand that she renounce her voices. She refuses. They burn her in a marketplace, and the smoke carries her name farther than any sermon could. Centuries later, she's canonised as a saint. Her ashes turn to relics, her defiance to devotion. The church that once condemned her now paints her in glass windows, her eyes lifted toward heaven, her armour gleaming softly in coloured light. It's a kind of irony only history can manage. Tomo and Joan never met, but they share a mirror. Both learned that conviction can look like madness to those without it. Both discovered that beauty, once stripped of vanity, can terrify empires. Tomo's calm, Joan's fire. Two faces of the same truth. That discipline and faith, when fused, can make the body itself a weapon of meaning. If you stand very still, you can almost imagine them meeting. A quiet field somewhere beyond time. The wind is cool. Joan holds her banner. Tomo rests her hand on the hilt of her sword. They nod to each other, understanding without words. Around them, the air hums, part prayer, part battle cry, entirely human. Their beauty isn't about faces or fabric. It's about alignment, mind, body, and belief moving in the same direction. The grace of Tomo's sword stroke, the steadiness of Joan's gaze. Both are acts of control against chaos. Each is a way of saying, I exist and I will not be moved. The world remembers them differently. Japan turned Tomo into legend. France turned Joan into liturgy. One became an archetype, the other a saint. But under the stories, their humanity remains. The ache in the wrist that holds the weapon, the exhaustion beneath the armour, the quiet prayer that someone someday will understand. Their echoes stretch far beyond their lifetimes. Every soldier who carries courage like a secret, every woman who turns discipline into defiance, they are Tomo's and Joan's descendants, even if they've never heard the names. And as history folds softly into itself, these two figures fade not into silence, but into music. The clash of swords becomes rhythm, the sound of marching turns to song. Because after centuries of battle, the world will find another form of beauty, not in war, but in what follows it. The instruments, the voices, the breath that fills the emptiness left behind. Our quiet path now carries us toward that sound, to the ancient music that bound people long before words, to the drums, flutes, and harps that taught humanity how to be still again. The next part of our journey won't smell of smoke or blood, but of vibration and faith. Where beauty no longer kills, it listens. From the echo of armour, the world softens again. The clatter of steel fades into vibration, long, slow, shimmering. The next beauty standard isn't painted on skin or forged in battle. It's plucked, stretched, and sung. You've entered the oldest orchestra of all, civilization itself learning to make sound. Music in the ancient world was never decoration. It was structure, the audible proof that chaos could be tamed. Every empire tuned itself like an instrument, and every note carried meaning. To strike a string correctly was to agree, quietly, that the universe had rules. In Mesopotamia, around the curve of the Tigris and Euphrates, artisans built the first lyres. The royal tombs of Ur, discovered thousands of years later, still held their outlines, wood frames wrapped in gold leaf, adorned with lapis lazuli and silver. A bull's head crowned the front, its beard carved in blue stone. It was an instrument you couldn't play without remembering your place, small, mortal, beneath something that glittered. Each string had to be tied with care, twisted from gut or hair, stretched to a precise tension. To tune it was an act of prayer, not to a god of music, but to one of order. The lyre's sound was soft and luminous, a golden hum that filled temples and courts. Archaeologists once found traces of bitumen on the pegs, a black resin used to seal the wood, still faintly fragrant after 4,000 years. Imagine that, a smell older than language, waiting patiently inside an instrument for the world to rediscover it. When a musician in Ur plucked those strings, the air itself became ceremony. The notes rose like smoke, shimmering between gold and silence. Scholars think the music accompanied hymns, rituals, funerals, moments where humans tried to sound less like people and more like the divine. Egypt followed with its own devotion to sound. In the cool light of the Nile's temples, harps stood taller than the musicians who played them. Painted on tomb walls, they look impossibly graceful. Long, curved frames of polished wood, their strings fanning out like rays of sunlight. Some were gilded, some inlaid with ivory. Gold wasn't excess here, it was theology. The Egyptians believed the gods could hear through beauty. that the more precious the material, the clearer the prayer. The harp players were often women, serving in temple orchestras dedicated to Hathor, goddess of music and joy. Their task was to keep the gods entertained and the pharaoh serene. The music wasn't written down, it was memorized, passed from ear to ear, a lineage of sound instead of ink. A note could live longer than a dynasty. When an Egyptian musician performed, she didn't face the audience, she faced the altar. The strings shimmered in the light, and the tones rose up through incense smoke. Each vibration was an offering. The sound was both gift and guidance, teaching the listeners how to breathe together, how to wait, how to feel the shape of stillness. Even silence mattered. In those marble halls, quiet wasn't emptiness, it was potential. The pause between notes was the part where the gods answered softly, through vibration you couldn't quite hear. The idea was simple, but strangely modern. The universe hums, and music is how humans remember the pitch. Of course, humans being humans, reverence soon collided with vanity. In royal courts, the finest instruments were decorated to the point of absurdity. A single lyre could be covered in gold, silver, turquoise, and the occasional opinionated gemstone. You might say it was the first band to go platinum, literally. But beneath the glitter, the purpose stayed the same, to transform sound into symbol. Every string represented something, a planet, a season, a virtue. To pluck them in order was to keep the cosmos balanced. If one note fell out of tune, somewhere, theoretically, a king lost patience, or a star drifted slightly off course. It's difficult to say whether the universe noticed, but the musicians certainly did. These early instruments were fragile, wood and glue and wishful thinking, yet they travelled astonishingly far. Traders carried their designs along rivers and deserts, across Babylon, Egypt and the Levant. Everywhere they went, they changed shape. Harps grew taller, lyres gained arms, lutes appeared, curved like crescents. Each culture added its own echo, but the principle stayed the same. Sound as order, order as beauty. It's almost touching how universal that instinct is. No matter how different the gods or the languages, humans kept building boxes that hummed. Every civilization at some point decided that invisible vibration was the best way to prove its existence. Imagine one of those early nights, a courtyard lit by oil lamps, the air heavy with myrrh and heat. A musician sits cross-legged, the lyre resting against her knees. The strings glint faintly, catching the starlight. She plucks one, then another. The sound is small but endless, like light folded into air. People around her fall silent. For a moment they forget rank, wealth, or worry. They are simply listening, suspended between the human and the divine. Thousands of years later, that same note will still be vibrating somewhere, faintly diluted but not gone. The air remembers everything that has ever passed through it, every breath, every string, every prayer disguised as melody. And if you listen closely enough, not with ears, but with the soft part of the mind that hears between thoughts, you might still catch it. The sound of gold humming in the dark, the sound of beauty inventing itself. As we move onward, those strings will give way to breath, to flutes, reeds, and voices. Music will leave the temple and travel into philosophy, where sound becomes morality and rhythm becomes restraint. Because the next chapter in this long history of beauty belongs not to gold or gods, but to air itself. From strings that shimmered like sunlight, the world now turns to breath, to the sound of air transformed into meaning. You're about to meet the instruments that needed no gold, no luxury, no altar, only lungs, patience, and a little courage. Because the moment humans discovered they could turn breathing into music, they began treating air as sacred material. Across ancient Greece, that devotion took the shape of the aulos, a double reed flute that looked deceptively simple. Two slender pipes, each carved from bone or wood, held between the lips like a secret. To play it well required a technique the Greeks called circular breathing, inhaling through the nose while exhaling through the mouth at the same time. Imagine trying to breathe infinity. That was the point. The aulos was the instrument of paradox. It belonged to Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, and to Athena, goddess of wisdom, depending on who was playing. In temples, it guided solemn processions. In theatres, it led frenzied dances. A philosopher might call it divine geometry. A drunk poet would call it a good night. The sound was sharp, rich, and strangely human, halfway between a voice and a cry. Plato admired it and feared it at the same time. He believed too much melody could corrupt the soul, that music without discipline was a kind of moral intoxication. The right rhythm could make a citizen noble. The wrong one could make him inconveniently creative. In other words, beauty needed supervision. So the Greeks turned sound into ethics. Notes were classified by mood and purpose. Certain modes made you brave, others made you gentle. A few, allegedly, made you dangerous to the Republic. It was the world's first attempt to regulate playlists, the philosophical version of parental controls. Farther east, in China, another civilization was tuning the air. But instead of fearing music's chaos, they trusted it to mirror the universe. Their philosophers said that when the world was young, it vibrated once, and that vibration never stopped. Music was simply the act of remembering it. In that quiet elegance lived the guqin, a 7-string zither played by scholars, poets, and those who like their solitude symmetrical. The guqin had no frets, no showmanship, just the whisper of fingertips sliding over silk strings stretched across polished wood. The sound was so soft it barely travelled across a room. You didn't play it for others, you played it for the air. A proper performance began with washing hands, lighting incense, and waiting until one's breathing matched the room. To pluck a note before that harmony arrived was considered impolite to the universe. The guqin was never about entertainment. It was moral training disguised as art. Confucius himself was said to have practiced it to align his thoughts with heaven's rhythm. Each note carried intention, each silence carried restraint. The Chinese word for music and joy once shared the same symbol. It suggests a belief that happiness was not a reaction but a resonance, that to be at peace was simply to vibrate correctly. Listening, in that sense, was a form of prayer. Meanwhile, in India, the same idea took on its own melody. There, music became a map of existence, an infinite conversation between sound, time, and devotion. The veena, a long-necked lute, embodied that dialogue. Its strings curved like the arms of the goddess Saraswati, patron of wisdom, who was often painted holding one. The instrument was both tool and metaphor, the body as resonance chamber, the soul as the hand that plucks. Indian musicians spoke in ragas, modes that weren't just scales but moods, each linked to an hour of the day, a season, or an emotion. Morning ragas shimmered like dew. Evening ragas glowed like embers. Each performance was part science, part surrender. You didn't simply play the veena, you entered it. Breath and discipline returned here too. The flutists who played the bansuri trained for years to hold a single note steady. Their teachers described the act as a conversation with God conducted entirely through exhale. One text warned, with impressive understatement, that impatience produced an unfortunate sound. In all three cultures, Greek, Chinese, Indian, beauty was inseparable from control. The musician's body became the temple, the lungs the altar, the fingers the prayer. Each civilization translated the same truth into its own language. Harmony wasn't just pleasant, it was moral. To live beautifully was to live in tune. And yet, each culture feared something too, the chaos that always hovered at the edge of rhythm. The Greeks built laws to contain it. The Chinese refined it into etiquette. The The Indians transcended it through devotion. Different answers, same anxiety, too much freedom, and music might remind people that perfection is optional. If you could stand among them, the Greek philosopher listening for moderation, the Chinese scholar in a garden of pines, the Indian saint beneath a banyan tree, you'd hear three worlds vibrating on the same breath. Somewhere between them lies a shared silence, that waiting moment before the next note, where the air itself feels holy. Imagine it, a summer evening long ago. In one courtyard, a student tunes his guqin while the incense burns down. In another, a flutist tests his breath under the stars. Somewhere in Athens, an aulos player rehearses for a festival, the reeds humming softly against his lips. None of them know the others exist, and yet, across distance and centuries, they're playing the same idea, that music can make humans behave as if they believe in order. The sound fades, but the discipline remains. Every inhalation, every pause, every perfectly timed silence becomes a part of a long experiment. How to stay balanced in a world that keeps moving. And as we leave these quiet courtyards behind, another rhythm rises in the distance. Deeper, older, carved into bone and earth. Drums begin to speak and the air thickens with heartbeat. Because not all music was meant to soothe. Some of it was meant to remember, to warn, to wake. The strings and flutes fade, leaving only pulse, the oldest music of all. Long before temples, before kings, before anyone thought to gild a harp or tune a scale, there was rhythm, the heartbeat beneath language, the one instrument that required no invention, only imitation, the drum. It began with hands and hollow things, stretched skin, carved wood, empty gourds, anything that could turn silence into conversation. Drums didn't decorate rituals. They were rituals. They carried messages, called communities together, and spoke the names of the living and the dead. In every corner of the ancient world, the same idea appeared, that sound could move faster than the body, could travel where words could not. In Africa, this idea became an art form so refined it still humbles modern linguists. The talking drum, an hourglass-shaped instrument strung with tension cords, could mimic human speech. A skilled drummer could compress a sentence into rhythm, letting tones and pauses replace vowels and consonants. Entire languages were once carried across forests this way, messages passing from village to village faster than a man could run. Each drum had a voice, and each player a dialect. To listen was to translate heartbeat into thought. Some messages were warnings of danger, invasion, fire. Others were invitations, weddings, births, market days, and sometimes the drums told stories, long narratives performed in rhythm instead of a rhyme. A storyteller might begin, once upon a time, with a simple 3-beat phrase, and everyone in the valley would stop to listen. To European explorers it seemed impossible, a forest that talked. To those who lived there, it was simply how the world worked. Even silence was part of the syntax. A missed beat could mean the difference between come home and come armed. The beauty of the talking drum wasn't its decoration, though many were carved with faces or painted with symbols. Its beauty lay in its intelligence. Sound shaped into meaning. It was a language without letters, poetry without paper. You could say it was humanity's first wireless network, though the ancient world would have called it magic. Across the ocean, in the high Andes of South America, music took another form. Thinner air, higher notes. Here, sound was breath rather than percussion. The siku or panpipe turned wind into architecture. Rows of reeds of different lengths were bound together, each one a column in an invisible temple. Two players would often share a single melody, alternating notes between their instruments, so that neither could complete the tune alone. It was music as cooperation. When you listen closely, the melody seems to weave in and out like mountain air. One note human, the next divine. The Andean people said the pipe spoke to the spirits of rain and stone, calling weather into being. Playing wasn't performance, it was negotiation. The mountains always had the final say. Even silence here wasn't absence, it was altitude. Every note carried the weight of breath, a reminder that air itself could be worship. You didn't just play the siku, you borrowed the sky's voice. Farther north, among the peoples of Mesoamerica, music became ceremony of awe and dread. The Aztecs used drums in rituals of life and death, the great Huehuetl standing as tall as a man, carved with serpents and jaguars, its skin stretched tight across the mouth. When struck, it didn't hum, it roared. There were smaller drums too, the teponaztli, made of hollowed wood, its two tongues cut to produce distinct tones. When played together, they spoke in pairs, their rhythm echoing heartbeat and rainfall. In temples, their sound guided dancers and warriors alike. It was music meant not to please, but to transform, to make listeners remember they were mortal. And then there was the death whistle, an artifact so strange that when archaeologists first heard it, they thought it must be a prank. It was a small clay instrument shaped like a skull, and when blown it produced not a note but a human scream, piercing, raw, uncanny. The Aztecs carried them into battle, hundreds at once. Imagine the sound, a wind of shrieking souls rushing across the plain, meant to terrify before the swords even met. Proof, if any were needed, that not all music was made for sleep. Yet even that sound had beauty in its intent. The scream wasn't chaos, it was choreography. Fear, too, could be tuned. The Aztecs believed that sound bridged the living and the dead, that the right vibration could guide a soul to its next destination. Their musicians weren't entertainers, they were navigators of the unseen. Across these worlds, Africa, the Andes, Mesoamerica, rhythm was both map and memory. Every culture found its own way to translate heartbeat into order. The talking drum used tone, the panpipe used breath, the Aztec drum used thunder. Together they proved what the earlier empires already suspected, that sound could hold power, and that power could be beautiful. Imagine standing in the middle of all that noise, the African forest echoing with coded speech, the mountain air trembling with twin flutes, the valley below pulsing with drums and whistles. It's not chaos, it's communication. The world is speaking to itself, one beat at a time. The rhythm grows softer now, fading back into pulse. What began as celebration settles into reflection. Beauty has moved through body, silk, steel, and sound, always returning to the same question. What does it cost to create order out of chaos? Because for every instrument there was labour, for every performance there was pain. The gold that covered the lyres was mined by human hands. The breath behind the flutes belonged to someone who had practiced until lungs trembled. The drum skins were taken from animals that once breathed beneath the same sky. Beauty always borrows its grace from something else. As the drums fade into memory, the night grows still again. The last note doesn't vanish. It settles, like dust after a procession. And in that quiet, we begin to hear another kind of sound. The small echo of human effort, the sigh before perfection, the silence that always follows creation. And it's here, in this breathless pause between music and meaning, that our story will turn inward again, toward the cost of it all. Because if beauty is discipline, then every note, every brush stroke, every carefully plucked string has left a bruise somewhere, and history, as it turns out, has a long record of receipts. The music fades, but something lingers, a quiet ache that isn't quite silence. The lyres have stopped humming, the drums have gone still, and what remains is the echo of labour. Every sound, every sculpture, every brushstroke of history carries a price, and if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear the debt being paid. Beauty, after all, has always demanded sacrifice. Sometimes money, sometimes time, sometimes skin. Humanity has been willingly uncomfortable in the name of grace for as long as there have been mirrors. The phrase "beauty hurts" is not a modern invention. It's an ancient business model. Take the pale faces of medieval Europe, luminous with health that didn't exist. That glow came from lead powder, the same metal used in pipes and poisons. Mixed with vinegar, it produced a silky white paste that went on smoothly and stayed forever, or at least until it burned through the skin. Doctors warned against it, which made it more desirable. Pain meant commitment. Commitment meant virtue. And virtue, when worn visibly, could be mistaken for class. Those same centuries offered hair tonics laced with mercury, perfumes with arsenic, and eye drops that made the pupils widen into fashionable pools of mystery. They also caused blindness. But it was a beautiful blindness, and therefore forgivable. Fashion, in the medieval sense, was theology with a death wish. Across the world, the story was the same in different colours. In Japan, women blacken their teeth with iron powder mixed in vinegar, a ritual called ohaguro, thought to protect enamel and display refinement. The smell was metallic, the process tedious, but the result was elegance by endurance. In China, foot binding turned walking into performance. In India, high-caste women endured hours of henna, sandalwood paste, and intricate braiding to achieve a composure that looked effortless. None of these practices were careless. Each was a negotiation between devotion and display, the body as currency, the soul as collateral. To be beautiful was to be useful to the system that defined beauty, and systems, as history loves to remind us, rarely pay their workers well. Artists too bore their share of the price. The pigments that painted saints and kings were ground from dangerous minerals. Cinnabar gave brilliant red, but its mercury content slowly poisoned those who mixed it. Verdigris, made from corroded copper, burned the skin green. The radiant blues of medieval manuscripts came from lapis lazuli, mined far away in Afghanistan by labourers who would never see the cathedrals their dust illuminated. The beauty of heaven was often bought with the lungs of someone else. Even the music we just left behind had its toll. The flute player's breath was discipline, bordering on devotion. Ribs aching, lungs burning. The lyre player's fingers bled on gut strings. Drummers hardened their hands until callous replaced tenderness. Beauty was never effortless. It only pretended to be. In every culture, perfection came with ritual, and ritual always required pain somewhere along the line. The Greek athlete oiled his body and scraped it clean with a bronze blade, removing sweat, dirt, and a little skin. The Persian soldier learned stillness until his muscles trembled. The court dancer balanced hours in poses designed to look like moments. The monk illuminated manuscripts by candlelight until his eyesight faded. History's spa treatments, you could say, had no refunds, and yet no one stopped. The pursuit of grace outlived every warning. We seem unable to resist polishing ourselves, our skin, our buildings, our sentences, as though smoothness itself could ward off decay. Maybe it's instinct, maybe it's denial. Either way, it's ancient. You can almost trace civilization through what it was willing to endure for beauty. The Egyptians shaved their bodies for purity, then invented wigs for spectacle. The Romans soaked in perfumes that contained crushed petals and questionable resins. The Victorians laced their waists so tightly they fainted at dinner and called it charm. The industrial age added new chemicals, the modern age added filters, but the logic remained. If it hurts, it must be working. Behind every elegant image lies exhaustion. A court lady holds still for hours while her maid pins gold thread through her hair. A monk grinds pigment until his hands ache. A musician repeats one passage until the body memorizes it better than the mind. Pain, repeated long enough, starts to resemble prayer. The same pattern appears in architecture and art. The cathedral builder who carves angels too high for anyone to see. The sculptor who spends years chiseling a statue's smile because it isn't yet serene enough. The result seems divine, but the devotion is human. Every masterpiece is a record of hours someone never got back. Of course, we can smile at the absurdity of it all. Humanity has invented 1,000 ways to suffer beautifully, from powdered wigs to corsets to the strange modern ritual of holding one's breath while taking a photograph. We've always confused discomfort with meaning. The logic goes something like this. If it requires endurance, it must be profound, and if it leaves a scar, it must have mattered. But there's tenderness in it too. The woman who paints her face until it shines like marble is not vain. She's hopeful. The craftsman who risks his lungs for colour believes he's building something that will outlast him. The dancer whose feet bleed on polished stone is chasing a moment of grace that feels like eternity. These are not foolish acts. They're small rebellions against decay, proof that even knowing the cost, we still choose to create. Imagine now a room lit by candlelight. A painter leans close to a panel mixing pigments that shimmer faintly. His fingers are stained red. The air smells of wax and wine. Somewhere outside, someone plays a distant note on a stringed instrument. The world keeps spinning, and he keeps painting. Not because it's safe, but because it's beautiful. That, in the end, is the strange mercy of perfection. It hurts, yes, but it connects. Across time and distance, every gesture of care, every polish, every repetition, every bruise earned in pursuit of grace becomes a shared language. We all know what it feels like to want something flawless, even for a moment. As the candle burns lower, the room grows quiet again. The painter sets down his brush. The air smells faintly of smoke and patience. The cost has been paid for tonight. Tomorrow he'll begin again. Because beauty, like history, is never finished. It only pauses between corrections. And as we step softly toward the final chapter, the silence stretches wide. A mirror waiting for one last reflection, one last echo. The question now isn't how beauty was made, but why we keep chasing it, century after century, as though it might one day forgive us. The journey ends where it began, with reflection. The powders and pigments have settled, the drums and lyres have gone silent, and all that remains is the faint shimmer of breath. History has dressed, undressed, and redressed itself 1,000 times in the name of beauty, and each century after its applause fades, turns to the mirror and whispers the same question. Was it worth it? The mirror never answers. It only reflects the next attempt. Across time, beauty has been a way of surviving decay. When the skin began to wrinkle, paint was invented. When empires began to crumble, monuments rose. When faith lost its voice, choirs replaced it. Every civilization, in its own way, has tried to build a prettier version of mortality, an illusion that endures long enough to make death seem polite. And yet, for all its effort, beauty never really conquered time. It only negotiated with it. Every perfection we've ever admired has come with an expiration date. The pale face fades, the gold peels, the music stops. The only thing that lasts is the longing to begin again. Perhaps that's the true legacy of beauty. Not the statues or the songs, but the persistence, the refusal to stop trying. The world might fall apart, but someone will always reach for a brush, or a cord, or a comb. Creation continues, even when perfection refuses to show up for work. If you could look at humanity from a distance, you'd see a strange pattern. Flashes of light across the centuries. A painter's studio here, a forge there, a weaver hunched over silk, a singer practicing a single note until it breaks. Millions of tiny acts of care, each insisting that something can be made lovely, even in a world that forgets to stay that way. The mirror, of course, sees all of it. It has watched faces change from painted white to powdered pink to pixel glow. It has seen the same hand smooth the same cheek in 10,000 variations. It has listened to people sigh and adjust their hair, to kings and servants, to warriors and poets, all asking the glass to approve. The mirror is the most faithful historian of all. It remembers what humans wanted to be, even when the world didn't cooperate. And somewhere in that reflection lives the echo, the sound that answers when beauty calls across time. You can hear it in the rhythm of the old instruments, in the patterns of a cathedral's arches, in the quiet perfection of a handwritten page. It's the same voice, repeated endlessly in different tongues. Make it last. Make it mean something. But meaning has its own humour. The echo changes every time it bounces back. The music that once frightened soldiers now plays softly in museums. The pigments that once glowed on altars now sit behind glass. The perfume that once covered sin now sells nostalgia. Beauty ages, but like the rest of us, it refuses to retire. What's most comforting, or maybe most absurd, is that even after all these centuries we haven't improved on the first idea, that to make something lovely is to make peace with impermanence. The act itself is the point. The mirror reflects, the echo repeats, the work continues. You can still find traces of that devotion everywhere, in a cracked fresco that refuses to fade, in the way someone straightens a tablecloth before guests arrive, in a melody hummed under breath while washing dishes. Beauty is not always grand. Most of the time it's just tidy, a small attempt to convince chaos to sit quietly for a minute. Perhaps that's what the medieval women were doing with their lead powders, what the Persian scribes were doing with their tablets, what the lyre players and the drummers were doing with their hands, not chasing vanity, but chasing stillness. Each was trying, in their own language, to stop the world from unravelling for just one verse longer. And in that sense, you're not so different from them. You keep your house clean. You adjust your reflection on a dark screen. You hum along to songs you didn't write. You try to look composed when you don't feel it. These are all small negotiations with time, small proofs that the desire for grace is still the most human instinct of all. If you could gather every echo in history, every footstep in a temple, every brushstroke, every sigh, you'd get a single, quiet sound, the heartbeat of endurance, beauty and power and memory all disguised as the same rhythm. So here, at the end, you can rest. The mirrors of history have stopped judging for now. The echoes have softened. The world is still turning, imperfectly, and that's enough. If you're awake, you've survived 1,000 standards. If you're asleep, you've escaped them. Either way, you're part of the same story, a long, improbable experiment in making decay look deliberate. Close your eyes, let the centuries settle. Somewhere, far away, a harp string hums faintly. A candle flickers, the echo fades. Beauty, patient as ever, waits for the next pair of hands.